The sun had barely begun its descent beyond the horizon when I pulled into my driveway. The gentle hum of my car's engine a comforting presence after a long day at the courthouse. The neighborhood was bathed in the soft glow of evening. A peaceful, albeit temporary, reprieve from the formalities of the bench. The azaleas lining my walkway seemed to nod in approval as I stepped out, carrying with me the quiet satisfaction of another case deftly handled. My tranquility was short-lived. There it was, the unmistakable sign of Karen's presence, a crisp, white envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. The paper trembled slightly in the breeze, a harbinger of the tempest that was my persistent neighbor. I unfolded it with a resigned sigh, the words scrawled there a familiar litany of grievances. Her objections were almost poetic in their pettiness. The angle at which my car rested, the audacity of my garden gnome's placement, the questionable shade of my recycling bin, perpetually out of step with the association's palette. Each note was a reminder of the invisible score she kept, a relentless tally of infractions that existed largely in her imagination. In the grand scheme, it was trivial a mosquito's whine in the symphony of life, but Karen's notes had become a constant refrain. She carried the mantle of the HOA with the fervor of a monarch defending her realm, her domain extending no further than the boundaries of our cul-de-sac. Her gaze was ever watchful, a lighthouse beam scanning the daily comings and goings, hungry for the slightest deviation from her stringent norms. For my part, I held my peace. There was a certain artistry in her persistence, a dedication to mediocrity that was almost admirable, and besides, I had learned long ago that the scales of justice were best tipped with patience, not pettiness. So I allowed her victory small, Pyrrhic triumphs that cost me nothing more than a chuckle and the occasional eye roll. Tonight, however, the note bore an air of foreboding, an edge sharper than its predecessors, a hint, perhaps, of a storm brewing on the horizon. Still, I dismissed it with a shrug, my mind more focused on the solace of home than the whims of my neighbor. There would be time enough for Karen's consternations, but it would not be this evening. Inside, the house welcomed me with its familiar warmth walls lined with books, the soft tick of the clock in the hallway, the gentle hum of a life lived deliberately. Here, I was far removed from the courtroom's theater, the weight of the gavel. Here, I was simply myself, unburdened by robes of authority or the expectations of others. As I settled into the evening's routine, I thought of Karen only briefly, a fleeting moment of curiosity about what drove her relentless campaign, a need for control. Perhaps, in a world that often refused to be reined in, an echo of some past slight, magnified and distorted in the funhouse mirror of her mind, or maybe, just maybe, a simple desire to be seen, to be heard, to matter in a universe that often overlooked the small, quiet voices. The night unfolded in its usual rhythm, the world outside slipping into darkness, but the note lingered in the back of my mind, a lingering dissonance in the evening's harmony. In the quiet solitude of my study, I resolved to remain calm, to meet Karen's tempest with the steadfast patience of the oak, its roots deep and unyielding. Little did I know, the storm was only just beginning to gather strength. The sun rose reluctantly on Sunday morning, casting a pale glow over the neat rows of houses in our neighborhood. The air was heavy with the usual suburban silence, only interrupted by the distant hum of a lawnmower. I had hoped for a peaceful day, but peace had become a rare commodity since Karen decided to escalate her campaign against my existence. Karen, with her ironclad grip on the HOA, had crafted a web of absurd regulations designed to ensnare and frustrate. Her latest masterpiece was a rule against parking in one's own driveway for more than 2 consecutive nights. It was an absurdity that could only flourish in the fertile soil of suburban bureaucracy. She had already wielded this rule against me, with disastrous results, but it seemed her appetite for control was insatiable. A glossy HOA newsletter appeared in my mailbox. its contents dripping with Karen's signature passive aggression. Compliance reminder, it screamed in bold letters. An exclamation point punctuating the forced cheerfulness. The rules were printed in a list as long as the Mississippi, each one more ludicrous than the last. I skimmed through them, noting the newest additions with a mixture of disbelief and dark amusement. A few neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, huddled together like a flock of nervous sparrows. Their conversations, hushed and urgent, floated towards me on the breeze. I caught snippets of their gossip, Karen's name slipping through the air like an oily fish. She had been on a spree, issuing citations for minor infractions: a trash can left out an hour too long, a garden gnome deemed too whimsical, and, of course, her vendetta against my perfectly parked car. I felt their eyes on me as I walked past, a silent jury deliberating my fate. Their judgment was palpable. A warm pressure on the back of my neck. I offered a polite nod, a silent acknowledgement of my role in this unspoken drama. Inside my house, the daylight filtered softly through the curtains, casting gentle shadows on the walls. I sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee warming my hands. The absurdity of it all was almost comical, almost, but the weight of Karen's antagonism was real enough. I was no stranger to conflict. My career as a judge had taught me the power of patience and the efficacy of quiet strength. But this was different. This was personal. Karen had turned our neighborhood into her own petty fiefdom, and I was her latest target. In the distance, I heard the mechanical whine of a leaf blower, the sound rising and falling like a maddening tide. It was a reminder of the mundanity that Karen had weaponized, transforming our peaceful enclave into a battleground of trivialities. A sudden rap at the door interrupted my reverie. I opened it to find a citation slip pinned under a rock on my doorstep. The paper was crisp and white, the ink still drying. It bore Karen's unmistakable handwriting, looping and self-assured. Another infraction, another step in her relentless campaign. I felt a flicker of anger ignite, but I let it cool into determination. Karen didn't know who she was dealing with. She saw only a neighbor, bound by her rules. But I was more than that. I was the law, and I understood the power of silence, the strength in waiting for the right moment to strike. I folded the citation slip and tucked it into my pocket. The day stretched out before me, shadowed by Karen's machinations, but beneath the surface, rivers of resolve ran deep, quietly eroding the foundations of her petty tyranny. It was only a matter of time. I sat at my kitchen table, the early morning light filtering in through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. The air was still, as if the world held its breath in anticipation. I sipped my coffee, the bitter warmth sharpening my focus. Today was the day I would begin to unravel the tangled web Karen had woven around this neighborhood. Karen, with her clipped speech and rigid rules, had overstepped. I could almost picture her now, standing in her immaculate garden, pruning her roses with the same precision she wielded over the HOA. She probably believed she had won, that she had taught me a lesson, but she had underestimated me, my patience, my resolve. I gathered my notes, a careful compilation of every transgression, every overreach, meticulously documented in neat, precise handwriting. The evidence was damning, a trail leading back to her overzealous purview, the unauthorized decision to sell what was mine, the casual cruelty masked as civic responsibility. She had painted herself into a corner with her arrogance. The neighborhood was waking up, the quiet broken by birdsong and the distant hum of mowers. I glanced outside, where my driveway sat empty, a stark reminder of Karen's audacity. There was a certain irony to it all. My car, gone without a trace, sold away as if it were some abandoned relic. I took another sip of coffee, feeling the liquid courage seep into my bones. My role as a judge had taught me the power of quiet resolve, the efficacy of a well-timed action. It was time to use those lessons. I had no intention of retaliating with pettiness or spite. No, my approach would be as subtle as a blade gliding through water. The meeting was scheduled for the afternoon. I would attend. Just another face in the crowd. Waiting for the right moment, I imagined Karen presiding at the head of the table, her smile one of self-satisfaction, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting, I felt a calm determination settle over me, the kind of calm that comes before a verdict is delivered. The moment when truth stands poised to speak. I arrived early, taking a seat at the back, observing the room fill with unsuspecting neighbors. There she was, the queen of her domain, greeting everyone with an air of superiority, her voice sliced through the murmur of conversations, her eyes scanning the room as if assessing her kingdom. When the meeting commenced, I listened patiently, my opportunity approaching with each passing minute. And then it came. A lull in the agenda. My hand rose slowly, catching her attention. Her smile faltered slightly, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Thus, this is about property rights, I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of 1,000 judgments. The room went still. Karen's smile froze, uncertainty creeping in. A powerful silence enveloped the room, each second stretching like an eternity. Her eyes met mine, and I held her gaze, unflinching. And in that moment, I saw the realization dawn. She knew, finally aware of the miscalculation she had made. The room seemed to hold its breath, a collective anticipation hanging in the air. I laid out my evidence with the precision of a surgeon, cutting through the pretense, exposing the truth beneath the facade. Each point was a deliberate unraveling, each fact a step towards resolution. The neighborhood watched, the illusion of Karen's omnipotence shattering like glass. As I finished, the silence was replaced by murmurs of disbelief, whispers rippling through the room. Her control was slipping, and she knew it. Her expression hardened, a futile attempt to maintain her composure. And then, in the midst of that chaotic realization, I stood, without another word. I left the meeting, the weight of justice trailing in my wake, a quiet storm, leaving behind a changed landscape, a neighborhood awakened to the truth. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the world. The horizon stretched out before me, promising a new dawn, a fresh start. Karen had taught me a lesson, but not the one she intended. She had reminded me of the power of patience, the strength found in quiet resolve. In the end, it was not just a victory, but a reminder that justice, like morning light, always finds a way to illuminate the truth. The first light of dawn crept cautiously over Maple Street, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and yawn as if waking from slumber. Birds chirped their morning hymns, oblivious to the silent war brewing in their suburban Eden. My driveway, hauntingly empty since the unjust sale of my car, stood as a testament to the power plays that had transformed our neighborhood into a stage for absurd theater. Neighbors began to take notice. Whispers carried on the breeze like leaves skittering across the pavement. The knowledge of my missing car spread slowly, each household passing the tale like a secret note in a classroom. I could see it in their eyes, the furtive glances, the quickened step as they approached my house, followed by the sudden aversion of gaze as if eye contact might pull them into the vortex of conflict. Karen, the self-appointed czar of our homeowner association, had overstepped. Her actions had been brazen, cruel even. But that morning she walked her dog with an air of unearned triumph, her chin lifted high in defiance of any storm she might have stirred. The irony was palpable. The same people who once praised her fastidious upkeep of community standards now watched her with a mix of curiosity and unease, as if she were a lioness who had unexpectedly turned on her pride. I stood by my front window, coffee in hand, a quiet observer in this suburban tableau. The mug's warmth seeped into my palm, a grounding contrast to the chill of autumn air sneaking through the cracks. They didn't know, none of them did, my title, my position a judge hidden behind the facade of just another neighbor embroiled in a petty spat. But beneath the surface lay the quiet power of the law, waiting patiently, like a predator, in the underbrush. The decision to reveal my role was not one I took lightly. There was a certain satisfaction in anonymity, in watching the pieces align before the final move. It was the sort of patience I had honed through years in the courtroom, waiting for the exact moment when truth would overshadow falsehood, when justice would unfurl like a spring flower. I watched as Karen stopped to chat with a neighbor, her gestures grandiose, her laugh a touch too loud. She was spinning her version of the tale, no doubt, casting herself as the heroine in a narrative of order and civility, battling the chaos of non-compliance. But the edges of her facade were beginning to fray. I could see it in the way her eyes flickered, glancing back at my house, feeling the weight of unseen scrutiny. My phone buzzed with a message from an old colleague's support from unexpected places, a reminder that I was not alone in this. The legal path forward was clear, yet there was an artistry to the timing, a rhythm to the unfolding. The tension in our neighborhood was a tightly wound spring, and I held the key to its release. The sky brightened, casting maple leaves in brilliant hues of red and gold. Neighbors convened on sidewalks, their conversations mingling with the rustle of leaves. I could sense their anticipation, a collective breath held in expectation of resolution. They had seen the storm clouds gather. Now they waited for the flash of lightning, for the cleansing rain of truth. For now, I remained the observer, the still point in a turning world. But soon, they would know. Soon, the fragile balance of Maple Street would tilt, and in its wake, a new order would rise, one built not on power wielded carelessly, but on the quiet strength of justice, patient and unyielding as the dawn. The morning fog lingered like a veil over the quiet cul-de-sac, wrapping the street in an uneasy hush. I stood in the shadow of my once pristine driveway, now tainted by the absence of my car, an empty space as glaring as a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. My thoughts circled back to the audacity of one woman, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. Her petty tyranny had crossed a line, one she couldn't erase with her usual condescending smirk or clipped emails filled with passive-aggressive bureaucracy. A judge, people often forgot that about me, perhaps because I wore the title as lightly as I could. But Karen's actions had marked a pivotal point. The authority I wielded in courtrooms, honed through years of discerning truth from the tangled skeins of human emotion and deception, was now a tool I would wield differently, quietly, precisely. And Karen, in her arrogance, had handed me the perfect opportunity. The legal process is a dance, one that requires patience, strategy, and a deep understanding of the rhythm of justice. I spent my days orchestrating the motions, filing the necessary complaints, setting the legal gears in motion with the clinical precision of a surgeon. Each document, a step closer to undoing the wrongs done. Each brief, a carefully aimed arrow. Karen had underestimated the quiet power of the law, a force that moves not in fits of anger or loud declarations, but through the steady, inexorable march of consequence. I found myself reflecting on the nature of power. Karen wielded hers with the overconfidence of a child playing with a loaded gun, unaware of the true damage it could cause. She believed herself untouchable, the embodiment of the HOA's will. But true power lies in understanding its limits and knowing when to wield it. It's a lesson usually learned the hard way. The hearing was set in a nondescript courtroom, the kind where the air is thick with unspoken grievances and unfulfilled promises. As the judge, I wore the robe of impartiality. As the plaintiff, I wore the resolve of someone wronged. Karen arrived, her demeanor brash with the misplaced confidence of one who still believed the world revolved around her whims. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, There was a flicker, a crack in her armor, fear, or perhaps realization, that this time she was not the puppet master, but merely a player in a larger game. The proceedings unfolded with the slow, deliberate cadence of justice being served. Evidence was presented by meticulously kept records, the unassailable facts of ownership, the blatant breach of protocol. Karen's defense crumbled like a sandcastle against the rising tide, her arguments as hollow as her threats. The judgment was swift, the verdict clear. My car was to be returned, reparations made, and Karen's authority clipped, her wings of petty tyranny irreparably singed. The irony was not lost on me. The law, so often wielded as a blunt instrument, had been her undoing, wielded with the finesse of a master craftsman. As I walked out of the courtroom, the weight of my victory settled like a gentle rain, cleansing yet profound. It was never just about the car. It was about standing up to a bully, about restoring balance in a world where people like Karen thrived on the assumption of impunity. The sun broke through the clouds as I stepped outside, illuminating the path ahead, a path where justice was not only served, but where respect and accountability were restored. The space in my driveway would soon be filled again, but more importantly, the space in our community, once overshadowed by Karen's oppressive reign, had found its light once more. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of quiet that sits heavy, like a thick fog blanketing a sleepy town. I could feel it settle on my shoulders, pressing down with the weight of expectation. The room was full, yet soundless, the air vibrating with the anticipation of unspoken words. Faces turned toward me, eyes wide, breaths held as if waiting for a symphony's first note. And there she was, Karen, sitting stiffly at her table, her mouth a thin, tight line. In the moments before I spoke, I recalled the chaos she'd unleashed. My car, gone like a whisper on the wind, vanished from my own driveway. I'd been calm. Of course, a judge must be. But beneath the surface, a storm brewed, a tempest of injustice and disbelief. Karen hadn't counted on me being a judge. Perhaps she imagined me as just another faceless neighbor, easily swept aside by her tidal wave of authority. Her mistake was her arrogance, her underestimation of the quiet power that lay hidden behind my calm demeanor. The proceedings unfolded with the precision of a well-rehearsed play, evidence stacked like cards in a deck, each one revealing the calculated moves she'd made to orchestrate my car's illegal sale. It was all there, the fabricated complaints, the unauthorized paperwork, the hasty transaction, every sordid detail laid bare for the room to see, each revelation a crack in her facade. And, as the truth unraveled, I saw her bravado falter, her confidence slipping like sand through an hourglass. She had cast herself as the queen of this little kingdom, ruling with petty decrees and ironclad lists, but kingdoms built on deceit seldom stand firm. In the end, it was not just about the car. It was about the principle, the sacred trust between community and individual. Karen had torn at its fabric. But today, we mended it. I spoke not as a judge delivering a verdict, but as a neighbor, a member of this community. The words were just a balm for the wounded trust. They rolled out like a river, steady and unyielding, restoring balance and order. And as the gavel came down, the room exhaled, a collective breath released like the breaking of dawn. Karen was sidelined, her influence reduced to whispers and memories. The HOA would no longer be her stage. I watched her leave, her figure small against the vast doorway. In her absence, the room felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The community's spirit rekindled. We had won, and yet this victory was quiet, like the soft closing of a book. It was not a triumph of glee, but one of quiet satisfaction, of justice served with grace. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson. The world felt new, as if washed clean by an unseen hand. I stood there, watching the colors fade into night, feeling the peace of resolution settle within me. In the end, it wasn't about Karen. It wasn't even about the car. It was about standing up when it mattered, about ensuring that justice never remains silent. And as I turned to walk back home, I felt a renewed sense of belonging, a quiet strength that whispered, "This is your place. Here. You are home."